15 and still be considered developmentally normal. Boys' puberty begins slightly later than the girls. On an average, boys experience puberty between the age of 11 and 15 years, but they may experience it anywhere between 9 and 17 years. Variations in children's experience of puberty are part of the larger pattern of normal individual variations, characteristic of all phases of child development. Puberty is a time of rapid growth and change. Puberty changes can be drastic and all at once, changing physical growth, cognitive development, emotional and social skill, as well as sensory and motor development. It's often is a difficult time of transition for the adolescents as well as the parents. So let us look at what are the characteristics of puberty. Puberty is unique and distinctive period. As we already told, it varies from individual to individual and also varied in time for certain persons, right? And it occurs at the most important of these are discussed below, right? The puberty is short and overlapping period. Puberty may be regarded as an overlapping period because it encompasses the closing years of childhood and the beginning years of adolescence. Considering that many extensive changes takes place inside the body as well as externally, puberty is a relatively short period lasting for 2 to 4 years. Children who pass through puberty in 2 years or less regarded as rapid matures, while those who require 3 to 4 years to complete the transformation into adults are regarded as slow matures. Girls as a group tend to mature more rapidly than boys as a boys group, but there is a marked variation within each sex group. Okay, so this is one of the characteristics of adolescence. This is one of the characteristics of puberty. Another important characteristic is puberty is divided into stages. Okay, that is the pre-pubescent stage, pubescent stage, and the post-pubescent stage. The pre-pubescent stage includes the first evidence of sexual maturation, primary sexual characteristics, and terminates at first appearances of pubic hair. During this stage, reproduction is virtually impossible. During the pubescent stage, the growth spurt begins to accelerate. Male experiences their first emission of semen, usually in the form of wet dreams, and menarche occurs in the females. The post-pubescent stage is characterized by the declaration of the growth spurt, completion of both primary and secondary characteristics, and fertility is possible. The third characteristic is it's a time of rapid growth and change among the young girls and boys. Puberty is one of the 2 periods in lifespan that is characterized by the rapid growth and marked changes in body proportion and is generally referred to as a puberty growth spurt. The growth spurt lasts for a year or 2 before children become sexually mature and continues for 6 months to a year afterwards. Thus, the entire period of rapid growth lasts for almost 3 years. During this period, the developing child experiences changes in body, changes in status, including appearance, clothes, and a range of choice and change in attitude towards sex and the opposite sex, all of which are necessity involved in a changed child pattern, child-parent relationships, and the changes in the rules and regulations to which the youngsters are subjected. Another important characteristics of puberty is that puberty is a negative phase. Many years ago, Charlotte Buller labeled puberty the negative phase. The term phase suggests a period of short duration. Negative suggests that the individual takes an anti-attitude towards life or seems to be losing some good qualities previously developed. There is an evidence that negative attitude and behavior are characteristics mainly of the early part of puberty, and the worst of the negative phase is over when the individual becomes sexually mature. There is also evidence that the behavior characteristics of the negative phase of puberty is more pronounced in girls than in boys. Then we have another characteristic, that is puberty occurs at a variable age. Puberty can occur at any time between the ages of 5 and 6 and 19 years. These are also variations in the amount of time needed to complete the transformation process of puberty. These ranges 2 to 4 years with girls on an average, requiring slightly less time than the boys. Variations in the age at which puberty occurs and the time needed to complete the transformation process of puberty create many personal as well as social problems for both boys and girls. It is the variations and timings of puberty rather than the changes associated with it makes puberty one of the difficult periods of the lifespan. Okay, so we are at page number 89 and we have two questions here. What is puberty and what are the different stages of puberty, which is already very clearly given, and we can just go through this notes which is already given and which is clear enough to be able to understand. Now, what are some concerns during this phase, during the phase of puberty? The rapid changes that take place in the puberty often leads to confusion, to feelings of inadequacy and insecurity, and many cases unfavorable behavior. Parents notice the negative attitude, more criticism and complaining, the passive and the active resistance, more delay and arguments, and the testing of the limits, more seeing what can be gotten away, that are hallmarks of early adolescent change. But when puberty does begin, the adolescent transformation becomes emotionally intensified and more complex. Puberty creates two problems. First, it creates process problem, how to manage the physical change that are besetting their bodies, right? This is a problem of self-conscious. And the second is it creates an outcome problem, how to act young manly or young womanly. This is the problem of sex role definition. Physical and psychological changes. The two major concerns relating to biological changes, characteristics of puberty, relates to normalcy and sex appropriateness. The physical hazards of puberty are minor compared with the psychological hazard. The most common of the latter are the tendency to develop unfavorable self-concepts, to become underachievers, unwillingness to accept change in bodies, or socially approved sex roles, and deviant sexual maturing. Because the onset and experience of puberty vary greatly, some adolescents will be considered early mature and some will be considered late matures. There are psychological and social consequences of early and late maturing for both males and females. But the research findings are not always consistent. Early research found that several positive consequences for the boys who matured early, including greater opportunities for leadership and higher self-esteem. More recent research presents a different picture, indicating that early maturings have more hostility, more depression and anxiety, more substance abuse, and other deviant behaviors. So early maturing of boys seems to have more opportunities for leadership, but are more likely to get drawn into high-risk behaviors. For girls, early maturity begins awkwardness and even psychological distress. Early maturing girls may be taller and heavier than other girls. In addition to the psychological impact, early maturing girls may feel early sexual pleasure. Late maturing girls seem to be least affected of all boys and girls. They seem to be given more psychological space to develop at their own pace. Time of puberty does not play as a big role in the emotional well-being of girls aspect at the social context. Now, social and emotional changes. The physical changes that occur during puberty gives rise to a variety of social and emotional changes as well. First, the ongoing physical maturation process directly affects the body and brain to alter children's needs, interests, and moods. Then, as children start to look and act differently, an array of social influences further accelerates the social and emotional changes children experience. As children observe that the bodies are changing, they may experience a new and unfamiliar set of social experiences. Reinforced by the first enjoyable experience of sexual arousal and by the peers and culture, they become interested in forming what we can become intense, romantic, and sometimes sexualized relationship with others. Also, as these bodily changes become visible to others, children may begin to experience being treated differently by others. For example, more rapidly maturing youth may experience an increase in their popularity, while in the more slowly maturing peers may experience a decline in popularity. Youth may also notice that other people are suddenly paying a great deal of attention to how they look that they are than how they are accustomed to. The physical changes associated with puberty becomes the basis for new emotional experiences. For example, it is common for parents to note that the children become moodier and more irritable during this period of their lives. The moodiness is commonly attributed to the sudden fluctuating of hormonal levels or raging hormones. It is certainly true that the sex hormones are powerful chemical agents that can affect the mood. During the puberty, the body is adjusting to these fluctuating hormone levels and does create mood swings. However, there are several other physical causes accounting for increased moodiness apart from fluctuating hormones. Developmental insecurity and early adolescence go hand in hand. For most young people, puberty is the enemy of self-esteem. It changes how they look at time when physical appearances become more important for social acceptance and social standing. As body shape and characteristics alter, they feel more vulnerable on that account. Whether they are physically maturing too fast or not fast, this is a period when self-examination is microscopic, when blemish can be a source of misery. When it takes much longer to get ready and go out, and what to wear and how to groom absorb more attention. For most young people, puberty catches them at a bad time during early adolescence, between 9 to 13, when they are separating from the shelter of childhood and begin striving for social belonging and place among the society of peers. Already feeling adrift from family and at sea in this brave new world, for more social independence, puberty demonstrates how they are also out of control of their body. Okay, so this is all about puberty, right? So you have the basic understanding of the concerns, the changes that occur in the physical and the psychological realms, and the social and the emotional changes that is happening in the adolescents can also cause a lot of problems in the way they look at themselves. The self-concept can be, can go, the self-concept can go low. They may not be happy with the way the body is changing. Any small things, that is shown on the face as a pimple, or getting too tall or putting on too much of weight. All these kind of things affects the esteem of the young ones. Esteem of the boy and the girl. Okay. So what are the hallmarks of early adolescent stage? And explain two main concerns of puberty. You can check these notes, which are quite enough, and you can read up this and you'll be able to understand. I'm on page number 91. Growth spurt. Now, what is growth spurt? It refers to any period of accelerated growth in physical development, especially in the pre-subsistent growth period. Biologically, puberty begins when the brain signals the release of certain hormones into the bloodstream. This process involves several steps and the coordination of distinct parts of the brain, the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland that it is time to release the hormones called the gonadotropins into the bloodstreams. Right? Once released, the gonadotropin activate the gonads or the sexual glands. The gonads are the testes in boys and the ovaries in girls. Once activated, the gonad produces and releases hormones into the bloodstreams called the androgens. And in the females, the ovaries produces hormone called estrogens. Various factors influence when the hormone signals triggering of puberty are initiated. Body fat composition is a major factor that influences the onset of puberty. Larger or obese youth may experience puberty earlier, while higher athletic or smaller children may experience puberty later. Hereditary may also be a factor, but environmental factors like the quality of diet, activity levels seem to play a larger role. Some scientists have noted that during the past several decades, female menarche, the onset of women's monthly period, have been occurring to younger ages. Though the cause of this earlier menarche is completely understood, current evidence suggests that the pervasive use of hormone additives in commercial food supplies and livestock feed and residual hormones and hormone-like environmental pollutant play an important role. The process and experience of puberty is different for boys than it is for girls. The puberty growth spurt for the girls begin at 8.5 to 11.5, with the peak coming to an average at 12.5 years old. From then on, the rate of growth slows down until growth gradually comes to standstill between 17 and 18 years of age. Now, boys experience a similar pattern of the rapid growth and starts between 10.5 years to 14.5 years. It reaches a peak between 14.5 to 15.5 years and followed by a gradual decline until the age of 20-21 years when growth is completed. Increase in height, weight, and strength come at approximately the same time. So the rapid growth and development that occur during puberty depends on the hereditary factors as well as the influence of the endocrine glands and partly on the environmental factors, which nutrition has been found to be the most important. Poor nutrition in childhood causes diminished production of growth hormone. Good nutrition, on the other hand, speeds up the production of this hormone. Emotional disturbances can affect growth by causing an overproduction of adrenal steroids, which have adverse effect on the growth hormone. Now, when the growth spurt of puberty is interfered with illnesses, poor nutrition, or prolonged emotional tension, there will be a delayed fusion of the bones and the children will now attain their full height. However, if such disturbances are detected in time and corrected, growth can speed up to 3 or 4 times in the normal rate and continue at the rate until the children reach their hereditary potentials. Body changes at puberty. Okay. So now there are 4 major changes, physical changes at puberty. Changes in the body size, changes in body proportion, development of the primary sex characteristics, and the development of the secondary sex characteristics. When you look at an, children growing, especially in the age group of 10 or 8, from 8 to, 10, 13, 14, 15, you will see this very, very obvious, right? So the first major change in the puberty is you can see the changes that is happening on the body, right? You can see the change in the way they have put on weight or the way they have grown tall, right? Among the girls, the average annual increase in the height before menarche is 3 inches. After the menarche, the rate of growth slows down, coming to a standstill in around till 18 years of age. For boys, the growth rate is rapid and the height increases around 13 years and ends in 15 years with the peak at 14. The greatest increase of height comes in the year following on the onset of puberty. After that, growth decelerates and continues at a slow rate until the age of 20 or 21. Because of the longer growth period, the boys achieve greater height by the time they are mature than girls do. Now, weight gain during puberty comes out not only from an increase in the fat, but also from the increase in the bone and the muscle tissue. Girls experience the greatest weight gain just before and just after the menarche. For boys, the maximum gain in weight comes a year or 2 later than for the girls and reaches its peak at the 16 years, after which the gain is small. It is not uncommon for both boys and girls to go through a fat period during the puberty. This fat usually disappears after the pubertal maturing. The most rapid growth in the body size comes during the year 1 or 2 before the sex organs begin to function, then tapers off. Changes in body proportions are influenced by the age of social maturing. Bones are augmented by cartilage during this period and the cartilage calcifies later. Typically, boys develop broad shoulders, straighter hips, and longer forearms and legs. Girls develop narrow shoulders and broader hips. The skeletal differences are then enhanced by the development of additional upper body musculature for boys and development of additional fat deposits on thighs, hips, and buttocks for girls. These changes account for differences in males and females as a weight and the strength. Okay, so this is all about the way physical changes that is very, very obvious both among the boys and the girls. Now, development of primary and the secondary sex characteristics. There are 2 types of physical changes that occur during the change to primary sex characteristics and changes of secondary sex characteristics. Now, primary sex characteristics refer to changes to the sexual organ themselves, like the uterus, vagina, penis, and testes. Secondary sex characteristics refer to the other visible changes that mark the adult maturation, such as changes in height and body shape. Now, let us look at, now we have all the details given on page number 93 and 94. When you look at 93, they have given a detailed explanation of how the primary sex characteristics, like how the sex organs grow and develop rapidly during puberty and become functionally mature in approximately the middle of puberty. The secondary sex characters, the physical features that distinguish males and females, develop according to the predictable pattern. But at the end of puberty, all these patterns are there at the mature or immature level. Secondary characteristics, the sex characteristics are enlarged breasts and hips for the girls, facial hair, and deep voices for the boys, and hair and sweat glands changes for both sexes. Primary sex characteristics changes for boys, including the enlargement of testes, penis, prostate gland, and cervical vesicles. These changes normally begin to occur between the ages of 9 and 14 years. Their growth is generally completed between ages of 12 and 16 years. The most significant and noticeable puberty-related changes for young men is spermacry, or the first ejaculation. It generally occurs between the age of 12 and 16. This indicates the boy is now producing the sperm and could fertilize a female egg through the sexual activity, resulting in female pregnancy. The first ejaculation often occurs during sleep. It is often referred to as a wet dream. Young men may also experience spontaneous erections when they are awake. This may occur when they become emotionally stimulated or for no reason at all. Such spontaneous erections can be uncomfortable or embarrassing for maturing young men. The primary sex characteristic changes for girls includes the uterus starting to build up the lining that will later be shed through the process of menstruation, and the vagina beginning to produce a mucus-like discharge. This mucus-like discharge is not actual menstruation, but rather at early form a vaginal lubrication. As young women mature, she can produce a lubrication and become sexually aroused, but she will also produce it in various quantities when she's not sexually aroused. These changes can happen in months or just weeks before the girl experiences menarche or the first menstrual period. Every youth experiences slightly different. Okay, so these are all things that is related to the primary sex characteristics. Okay, the most significant and the noteworthy is sex changes for young women is the menarche or the first menstrual cycle. This occurs when the
అంటే
youth.
అప్పటి నుంచి ఆమె అండ్ హెడ్ అతను ఇద్దరే వింటున్నారా చూడండి.
Hello, student. Can you please put on your unmute? Can you mute yourself? Please mute yourself. The most significant and noticeable primary sex change for the young woman is menarche, or the menstrual period. This occurs when the uterus, the organ that will later carry on and nurture a baby, shed its first lining of tissue and blood. In adult, this lining is shed once a month on an average of 28 days. The purpose of this lining is to condition the uterus for the initial portion of pregnancy in which a fertilized egg must attach to the uterine lining. The lining is shed each month when the body realizes it is not pregnant. On an average, the first menstrual period occurs between ages, while some girls may experience a full menstrual flow during the first period. Some girls may only experience a light or a spotty flow during their first period. Young ladies may also experience very irregular period intervals and duration in the first months as the cycles regulate. First periods may be uncomfortable or embarrassing for young ladies. For those who have joined now, I am on page number 94. Yes, page number 94. And today's, I am taking unit 7, right? Unit 7, puberty. Page number 94, I am at secondary sex characteristics. So another noticeable sign in secondary sex characteristics is the growth spurt in the height. On an average, the growth spurt in girls between 8 and 13 years, and in boys, it will be 10 and 16. Generally, girls hit the peak of their growth spurt between the ages of 10 to 13 years, while boys hit the growth spurt between 12 and 15 years. And then you see individual youth develop at different rates. These differences often result in some children feeling uncomfortable in their own skin on the basis of their looking differently than their peers. This may occur if they grow taller or different times for their friends or peers. Like what you may also notice the parts of the bodies, like legs and arms growing slightly different at different rate. These periodic irregularities may cause them to feel more awkward and uncoordinated. Hence, in general, the youth build muscle mass and experience increase in strength coordination during puberty. And the obvious secondary sex change for both the sexes in body hair. Youth begin developing pubic hair around the external genitals or the private area. Pubic hair appears for girls between the age of 8 to 14 years and for boys between 10 to 15 years. And it grows fully between the age of 14 and 15 years for girls and between 14 and 17 years for boys. Okay. So underarm hair that is normally arises, appears in the youth between the age of 10 and 16 years. For boys, the facial hair between the age of 12 and 15 years. In addition to all the youth developing thicker, coarser hair, body hair during this time. Head hair also becomes coarser and thicker and may even dark in color. Young men and women may become interested in shaving or otherwise grooming their facial, leg arm, underarm, or even during this period. Their attitude towards grooming body hair is influenced by the fears and the customs of their family, religion, and culture. Girls will also experience significant changes to their body shape, while boys will experience deepening of their voices. Girls may feel uncomfortable during puberty as the body shape changes to accommodate future growth and development of a baby. Now, these changes include widening of the pelvis, the bones, that is the hips, or increase of body fat, right? Percentages and the development of breasts. These changes may make girls feel self-conscious or fat as they are not accustomed to be their new curvy bodies. Breasts begin to bud on an average between ages to 8 to 13 years. Breasts rarely grow at the exact same rate. Thus, a girl may notice one breast is larger and the other during this phase than the other. This normal and expected, but if breast asymmetry continues after breast development should be completed. Families should consult a family physician. Breast growth is completed on an average between the age of 14 and 15 years. Meanwhile, boys experience changes in their voice, right? Changes in their muscle growth. They're growing stronger, resulting in deeper voices, right? And their voices may crack while they're talking. Okay, so this is normal, but it is annoying and embarrassing, especially during this phase, the phase of puberty. Okay, so tremendous rapid changes occur and dramatically transform children's lives, exposing them to new dangers and opportunities. So thoughtful listening and caring guidance by the caregiver can help the children navigate into the uncharted territory. That is from childhood to the adolescent. That is childhood to the puberty, and then from puberty to adolescent. Okay, so I'm on page number 95. You can see there are questions. What are the 4 major changes, physical changes at puberty? It is given in here very, very clearly. List factors influencing rapid growth of development that occurs during puberty. So you can write. There's also a summary on page 96. Please check your progress. Model question answers are there. There are students who are asking me for giving me important questions or model answers, right? Go through every unit. At the end of unit, you'll find the model question answers, model examination questions, right? When you go through it, you'll be able to understand, right? So read up the whole chapter for a better understanding so that you'll be able to address the questions that are there. I'm sure you'll be able to do it. It is not at all difficult. It is very interesting also. It is all about how a lifespan develops from one stage to another. Okay, so here we move from the period of adolescent to the period of puberty to period of adolescence. So I complete unit number 7 and I'm moving to unit number 8, right? Which is focusing on adolescence. Okay, so let's look at what are the objectives for us for the lesson number 8. I am on page 99 if you are having your book. Okay, now the objective of this lesson is to define adolescence and describe its characteristics. Identify the physical and the third, I'm sorry for the interruption. And the third is discuss personality development in adolescent and explain hazards related to adolescent. Okay, so adolescent is a distinct phase. Adolescence is a distinct phase of developmental lifestyle in human. It is a complex multi-system transitional process involving progression from the immaturity and social dependency on childhood into adult life with the goal of expectation of fulfilled developmental potential, personal agency, and social accountability. Conceptualized by G. Stanley Hall, the founder of adolescent science, adolescence is the process of physical and psychosocial rebirth. The term adolescent and puberty are often used synonymously, but they are not the same. Adolescence is 10 to 12-year period of social and psychological growth that transforms the dependent child beginning in the elementary or later early middle school, into a functionally independent young adult in his or her mid-20s. Puberty is 1 to 3 year process of hormonal and physical changes that causes the young person to reach sexual maturity. Girls usually entering it about a year earlier than boys. Adolescent is described as being the teenage years from 13 to 18 years of age. However, puberty decides the onset of adolescence. Therefore, adolescence occurs in some children as early as 9 years of age. During this period of time, the child has a great deal of concern over his body image. And any discrepancies in this stage in the child's eyes, such as obesity or early or late maturation, etc., may be manifested into disorders, a variety of disorders. Now, during adolescence, there is a large degree of psychological growth as children make adjustment in their personality due to the rapid physical and sexual development, which are characteristics of this period of life. Adolescents face ongoing conflict and difficulty adapting to sudden upsurge of sexual and aggressive drives. These changes causes unrest and confusion in adolescent inner selves and the way they perceive the world. Okay, so now we move on to what are the characteristics of an adolescence. Adolescence is an important period of change, and it stands out at a time of a significant change in multiple life domains. For example, the adolescent experience physical hormonal changes of puberty and each physical maturity and become capable of reproduction. Physical changes in adolescence include the growth spurt, change in the primary and secondary characteristics, changes in the organ directly related to reproduction, and secondary characteristics of bodily signs of sexual maturity that do not directly involve the reproductive organs. Okay, adolescent thinking is on a higher level than that of children. They mature cognitively, developing more sophisticated ways of thinking about themselves and others. Children are able to think logically about the concrete, the here and now. Adolescents move beyond these limits and can think in terms of what might be true rather than what they see is true. They are able to deal with abstraction, test hypotheses, see infinite possibilities, yet adolescents still display egocentric behaviors and attitude. Now, adolescents are developing socially and emotionally during this time. On a social level, they enter institutional settings, such as the secondary schools, and they assume new roles connected with the schools and the job. The most important task of adolescence is the search for identity. This is often a lifelong voyage launched in adolescence. Along with search for identity comes its own struggles and independence. These changes in biological functioning, cognition, and social environment in terms precipitate transformation in interpersonal relationships and self-conception. The plethora of changes presents avenues of growth in new direction, making adolescence, especially the early part of it, a period rich in potential for novel behavior in understanding the changes. Okay, now adolescence is a problem age. It is often assumed that adolescents are a very difficult period of life. With adolescents being very stressed and moody, it is further assumed that they are stressed, they have to cope with enormous changes in their lives. And some of these changes are in sexual behavior following puberty. And there are also large social changes, with adolescents spending more time with others of the same age and less time with their parents than they did when they were younger. Adolescence is also a time when decisions need to be made about the future. Adolescence is a certainty, a period of change, and adolescents do have various pressures on them. However, it is not true that adolescents are especially stressed and they are no greater risk of being in crisis than the adults of all ages. Adolescence is a time of unrealism. Obviously, do not always act in ways that serve their own best interests. Even as identified by them, sometimes their perception of their own risk, even of survival or adulthood, is larger than the reality. In other cases, they underestimate the risk of particular actions or behavior. It is possible, indeed likely, that some adolescents engage in risky behaviors because of their perceptions of invulnerability. The current conventional wisdom of adults views adolescent behaviors. Others, however, take risks because they feel vulnerable to a point of approaching hopelessness. In either cases, this perception can prompt adolescents to make poor decisions that can put them at risk and leave them vulnerable to a physical or psychological harm that may have a negative impact on the long-term health and viability. Feelings of uniqueness may stem from fascination with one's own thoughts to a point where adolescents believe that his or her thoughts or experience are completely novel and unique when compared to the thoughts or experience of others. The belief stems from the adolescent's inability to differentiate between concerns of his or her thoughts from the thoughts of others, while simultaneously over-differentiating his or her feeling. Thus, adolescent is likely to think that everyone else in the imaginary audience is just concerned with him or her, or he himself or she is herself, while at the same time, the adolescent might believe that she or he is the only person who can possibly experience whatever feeling he or she might be experiencing at that particular time. And these experiences are unique to him or her. Adolescence is a transitional period and the threshold of adulthood. Now, life transitions are periods in time where individual experiences major changes. Transition may occur during the period to relatively stable of human development. The associated changes with the transition brings in instability as the person passes through the period. During this period, the individual typically required to make major adjustments, to develop new skill, or to learn to cope with new experiences. One major life transition begins in the final year or years of high school, and that is adolescence. The transition between the childhood and adult is crucial developmental stage for our mental well-being. It is a period of physical, cognitive, social, and emotional changes. It is also a period of multiple transitions involving education, training, employment, and unemployment. An adolescent accepts responsibilities of adulthood. They must make important choices about leaving home, continuing their education, finding a job, starting a family. Okay, so all these are major concerns of the adolescent as they move on, from the high school to making choices to the life's careers and academic. Over the several decades, with more youth entering college and delaying marriage, the transition has become even more complex. Economic, social, and cultural factors such as high cost of secondary education and fractured connections to the community have compounded the confusion in this period. Adolescence is nestled between the two transitions, the end of the childhood and the beginning of the adulthood, with malleable borders. Epidemiological data suggests a trend towards earlier puberty in some countries. At the other end of the spectrum, societal changes and a growing awareness and the timeline of brain development are pulsing the accepted threshold for adulthood, are pushing the accepted threshold for adulthood well in the 20s. A successful transition to young adulthood will form a foundation for individual future stages of development and transition. Okay, so these are all the important points that we need to remember when we talk about the characteristics of the adolescent. That it's an important stage, it's a problem age, and it's a time of unrealism, and it's a period of an important threshold where they are transitioning from the later childhood, to the adulthood, from the adolescent towards the adulthood. Okay, so you have questions here. I'm on page number 102. We have defined adolescence and why is adolescence called the transitional period. Okay, so you have all the answers here. Why is it called? Because of all the changes that is happening from different levels, not only at the body level, but also emotionally, cognitively, socially, how the changes are occurring. Now let us look at each development of the adolescent, physical and psychological development. Okay. Now in the physical and psychological development, we look at the physical development. The signature physical changes in the adolescence is puberty, a period of rapid skeletal and sexual maturation that occurs mostly in early adolescence. This also already we have discussed in the previous chapter. Adolescent growth first centers on the extremities, the legs and arms during early stages of adolescence. Changes also occurs in the facial configuration of both the sexes. The lower portion of the head begins to grow because the chin lengthens and the nose grows in width or length. Additional changes in proportion on the face are accredited to changes on tissue distribution. Even though both the sexes undergo this change, within females, a layer of subcutaneous fat develops, which causes the rounding and the softening of the contours of the face and the body. Whereas the male subconscious fat development is more or less pronounced, but the development of muscles and bones in the face is clearly seen. This gives the male a leaner and a more angular face than the other changes that occur in the surface of the body in both sexes. Okay, so these are all observable. So when you observe the adolescent, especially the physical changes, it is very, very obvious. You can see that on their face, how the face is changing. It is becoming round, and how sometimes some people's nose is becoming broader. And those are all the changes that you can see, and the differences that we can see both in the boy and the girl. Okay, so both male and female skin undergoes the changes, such as becoming coarser, especially the voice, and sebaceous gland becoming more active, producing oily secretion, which usually causes acne or blackheads. Sweat usually causes an odor in adolescence because the chemistry and the composition of the sweat is altered by oils that the sebaceous glands emit. Adolescents also slow and increase on the blood pressure and decrease in both basal metabolic rate, the rate at which the body is sending resting state that consume oxygen, and in the pulse rate. Fine. So now there is psychology. What is psychological development? Now, adolescents not only have developed changes physically, but there are also psychological changes. Now, what are those psychological changes that we can observe in an adolescent? There are three distinct changes that are mentioned. Okay, even though there is a great deal of overlap of the changes, they may not occur during the age span. Okay, during the early adolescence, that is 11 to 13, a development usually centers on developing a new self-image due to the psychological change. Adolescents need to make use of this newly acquired skill of logical thinking and ability to make judgment rationally. When they reach mid-adolescence, that is between 14 and 15, they strive to loosen their ties to their parents, and their emotion and intellectual capacities increase. The adolescent becomes adventuresome and experiments at different ideas. This plays an important role in finding one's relation to one's group and the opposite sex. During this time, the adolescent battles over his own set of values versus the set established by the parents and the adult figures. The adolescent also begins to take on more control of education and vocational pursuits and the advantages. It is during this time the adolescent self-dependence and sense responsibility becomes apparent, along with the quest to contribute to society and find their place in it. During later adolescence, that is from 16 onwards, adolescents are more stable sense of their identity, place in the society. At this stage, they should feel psychologically integrated and should have fairly consistent view of the outside world. They should by this time have established a balance between the aspiration, fantasies, and reality. In order for them to achieve the balance, they should be displaying concerns of others through giving and caring instead of the earlier childhood pattern of self-gratification. At the conclusion of late adolescence, they should have designed or discovered their role in society and have a set of realistic goals in life that are begin in earnest to achieve it. Okay, so these are all the covering the physical and the psychological development. Okay, now we move to the moral development and the family relationships. Okay, and the interest and the personality changes that occurs, that is self-concept and self-esteem, right? These are very important. Moral behavior, family relationship, interest, personality changes of self-concept and self-esteem. Okay, moral development refers to a sense of values and ethical behavior among adolescents' cognitive development. In part, lays the groundwork for moral reasoning, honesty, and pro-social behavior such as helping, volunteerism, of caring others. Moral development defines an individual ability to make principled choices and how to treat another. During this early adolescence, many attitude, beliefs, and values that young adolescents develop remain with them for life. They move away from the blanket acceptance of adult moral judgment to the development of their own personal values. However, they usually embrace the value of parents or key adults. The increased capacity of the young adolescent of analytical thought, reflection, introspection characterizes the connection between the intellectual and the moral development. Many young adolescents also tend to idealize and possess a strong sense of fairness as they progress into interpersonal conformity stages of moral development, right? When we study about the Kohlberg, 1983. Young adolescents begin to reconcile their understanding of people who care about them with their own egocentricity. The transition from self-centered perspective to considering the rights and the feelings of others. Gender affects how adolescents approach moral dilemmas. Male tends to view moral issues through justice lens, and female tends at the interpersonal care lens. Kohlberg viewed development in terms of different levels of reasoning applied to choices people make in their lives. This type of moral reasoning occurs throughout a person's life and depends on an individual social interaction. A person evolves from one level of reasoning to another. He or she is able to understand higher level of reasoning and is able to experience social interactions. Okay, Kohlberg viewed moral reasoning in 3 levels, which included 6 sequential stages. He perceived all these stages as universal. That is, no stage ever skipped and applicable to all cultures. Kohlberg stressed that actual decisions people make are not important, but the reasoning behind the decisions are important, and the reasoning determines which stage of development a child is in. Family relationships. Okay. Now, adolescence in modern society is typically a period of preparation for independence, right? Now they are wanting to move out from, being a child to moving into adult, more of reasoning, more of logical thinking, right? And for adolescent, the father is the most important figure who teaches to control his activity. For an adolescent female, the mother is the most important figure. Adolescent females have closer relationship with the older kin. Adolescent males have older relationship with the brother. The amount of contact and closeness of the older sibling or the gender is similar for adolescents of both genders. Now, among societies, male-centric household, adolescents are typically expected to obey fathers. Subordination is less expected in societies, which is female-centric household. During adolescent, parent-adolescent conflict tends to increase. The conflict appears not necessarily part of gaining independence from parents while learning new ways of staying connected to them. 2 kinds of conflict typically occur. Spontaneous conflict over day-to-day matters, such as what clothes to wear, what clothes are allowed to purchase or wear, and whether homework has been completed. Conflicts over important issues such as academics, performance. Interestingly, the spontaneous conflict that occurs on a day-to-day basis seems to be more distressing to parents than to the adolescent. Families today can take many forms: single parent, shared custody, adoptive, blended foster, traditional, dual parent, to name a few. Regardless of the family, from strong sense of bonding, closeness, and attachment to the family have been found to be associated with better emotional development and better school performance and engagement of fewer high-risk activities such as drug abuse. Okay? So adolescents who come from home with this style of parenting tend to achieve more in school, report less depression, anxiety, score higher in measures of self-reliance and self-esteem, and less likely engage in delinquent behavior. Okay, so it is very important. This phase for the adolescent is very important to have a good bond and a healthy bond between the parents and themselves. Okay, now what are the interests and the personality changes? This is mainly focused on the self-concept and the self-esteem. Now, Erik Erikson was specially interested in the personality development during the adolescence. According to him, main challenge of the adolescence is the struggle to form a clear sense of identity. This struggle involves working outside the stable concept of oneself as a unique individual, embracing ideologies of system and values that provides a sense of direction. Also, although the struggle for sense of identity neither begins nor ends in adolescence, it does tend to especially intense during this period. Identity involves 2 concepts. Okay, the first one is a self-concept, the set of beliefs one has about oneself. This includes beliefs about one's attributes, right? Thoughts and roles and goals, occupation one wants to have and grown, interests and values and beliefs, religious and political. Second, self-esteem, which involves evaluating how one feels about one's self-concept. The global self-concept system refers to how much we like or approve our perceived selves as a whole. Specific self-esteem refers to how we feel about certain part of ourselves as an athlete or as a student or as how one looks. So self-concept and self-esteem are 2 different concepts. Many factors influence identity and development of self-concept. For example, adolescents developing cognitive skills enabled to make abstract generalizations about self. The physical changes they are experiencing can strongly influence either positively or negatively, global self-esteem. This is particularly true in the early adolescence when the physical appearance topped the list of factors that determine global self-esteem, especially for girls. Comment by others, particularly parents, peers, they reflect the appraisal of the individual that some adolescents may incorporate as a part of their identity feeling about themselves. So it's a very crucial feat. What others tell them about how they look, how they appear, no, does impact their self-concept. Okay, now what is self-concept? That is self-image. Yeah, what is self-concept? The process by which an adolescent begins to achieve a realistic sense of identity also involves experimenting with different ways of appearing, sounding, and behaving. Each adolescent approaches the task in his or own unique way. So just as one adolescent will explore more in one domain, another will explore in another, right? In adopting certain styles of appearances. More experimentation is a positive sign that adolescent feels secure through to explore the unknown. Adolescents who fail to experiment in any realm are sometimes seen to be more stable, but in fact, experiencing more difficulty than the youth who seem to fit into the one interest to another. Adolescence is the time when experimenting with the alternatives is developmentally appropriate, except when it seriously threatens the youth. Okay, so as children grow older, self-description gradually evolve from listing their physical behaviors and other external attributes to sketching their and enduring the interior qualities such as traits, values, and ideologies. There is a developmental shift which is more abstract to psychological portrayal of self. Adolescents use more psychological terms to describe self than children do. They are becoming much more aware that they are not the same person in all situations. Now, there are cross-cultural variation in the nature or content of people's self-concept. Clearly, the traditional values and the beliefs of one culture can dramatically influence the kind of self-concept that emerge. What is considered desirable in one way of self-concept may very dramatically, may vary. See, what is considered desirable in the way of a self-concept may vary dramatically across culture. Western societies such as US, Canada, Australia, and industrialized countries in Europe might term individualistic society. I'm sorry for the interruption. Yeah, many Asian cultures could be considered collectivist societies. People are more cooperative. Yeah, there was a little disturbance. I'm sorry. Yeah. Western societies such as US, Canada, and all these places, they value competition and individual initiative and tend to emphasize ways in people differ from each other. Many Asian cultures like Indian, Japan, and China may be considered the collectivist societies. People are more cooperative and interdependent rather than competitive and independent. Their identities are closely tied to groups to which they belong, families, religious organizations, and communities, rather than their own accomplishment and personal characteristics. The distinction between individualistic and collectivist cultures and value systems are important ones and have implications for such aspect of self as ways in which individuals look at and evaluate achievement, behavior, aggression, altruism, and moral development, just to name a few. Self-esteem. As children develop, they not only grow to understand more and more about themselves and construct more intricate self-portrait, but they also begin to evaluate the qualities they perceive having themselves. The evaluative aspect of self is called the self-esteem. Children with high self-esteem are satisfied with the type of person they are. They recognize their strong points and acknowledge their weaknesses, often hoping to overcome them, and generally feel quite positive about the characteristics and competencies they display. Children with low self-esteem view the self as less favorable, light often choosing to dwell on perceived inadequacies rather than on any strength they may happen to display. Self-esteem develops uniquely for each adolescent, and there are many different trajectories of self-esteem possible over the course of adolescence. The self-esteem, whether high or low, may remain relatively stable during the adolescence or may steadily improve or worsen. By early adolescence, one's perception of self-worth becomes increasingly centered on interpersonal relationship. Susan Harter and her colleague coined the term relational self-worth to describe their finding. The adolescents often begin to perceive their self-worth somewhat differently in different relational contexts with parents, teachers, classmates, and female classmates. All these domains of related self-worth contribute to one's global self-esteem. Although one domain may be much more important to some teenagers for the others. One adolescent may enjoy high school global self-esteem because he views himself as especially bright and receiving ample support and admiration from teachers, even though peers may consider him nearly nerdy. Another may enjoy equally high global self-esteem because she views her competencies with peers in a very favorable way, even though she feels less efficacious in her relations with parents and teachers. Here, there is an indication that our self-esteem depends not only on how others evaluate us, but also on how we evaluate ourselves, on the kinds of relationships and the aspect of relational self-worth that we view as most important or central to our self-concept. Now, girls who enjoy high self-esteem are those who have had the supportive relationship with friends, whereas boys more likely to derive high self-esteem from their ability to successfully influence their friends. Low self-esteem in girls is more strongly associated with failure to win friends' approval, whereas major contributor to low self-esteem in adolescent and boys is lack of romantic competence, as reflected by a failure to win or maintain the affection of girls. Biology and cognitive development are important contributors to our developing self-esteem. Yet there are many social influences that contribute to the development of self-esteem. Our home environment, our peers, our parents' interaction with us, even cultures we live in influence our self-esteem. To sum up, one's self-concept becomes more psychological, more abstract, and more coherent, integrated self-portrait from childhood throughout adolescence. The adolescent becomes sophisticated self-theorist who can reflect on, understand the working of his or her personality. Okay, so with this, we close the self-esteem and the self-concept of adolescent. And there are the last part of it is the hazards and the, what are the hazards? The physical and the psychological hazards that is very common among the adolescents. So here I am on page number 108. You can just go through. There are different hazards like physical hazards, injuries, violence, HIV/AIDS, because this stage is a vulnerable stage where the young people are very prone to take risk. They're very prone to experimentation, right? So they might get injured. Like injuries are very common. Sometimes even death, rash riding of a motorcycle or drowning, learning to swim, and there's also violence, right, which is the third leading cause among the adolescent. And there is HIV/AIDS because of the vulnerability aspect of how they are very prone to, experiment with the opposite sex. And then there are infectious diseases that are very, very common, especially among the adolescents. Then there is early pregnancy and childbirth because since the youngsters are young adolescents are vulnerable and they take risks, so they are very prone for getting into early pregnancy or childbirth, or even experiment with alcohol, with tobacco, and with drugs. Okay, and there is also a time where the nutrition and micronutrition deficiencies are there, and the physical activities where they are very, very, prone to get into a lot of activities like games, sports, and since if the inactivity gets higher, then they get into other problems of obesity, right? And then among girls, there could be other hormonal and other issues, okay? And psychological hazards, there could be also a lot of psychosocial disorders that are common during the adolescence, unhealthy behaviors, having eating disorders or obesity or smoking, using drugs, violent behavior. All these are coming under the hazards. So I recommend my dear students to please go through in the detail. Okay, it's not at all a difficult subject to deal with. You can go through each and every unit, especially this unit 8 that talks about puberty and adolescence, right? And you read up the whole thing and you'll have understanding of how the adolescents can even develop illnesses and disabilities, at this phase, especially, the depression because of relationship failure, they can develop so many other problems, not able to concentrate, and they are having obsessions, too much of overthinking or negative thinking. All this comes as the hazardous, especially for the adolescent. Okay, so there is questions again given. List common physical hazards of adolescent, factors that make adolescents very vulnerable or poor mental health. All this is given here, and there is a summary given in the textbook on page 111, and there are also model questions given on 112. Check your progress with the model answers, and you'll be able to understand better this subject. There's also glossary given. And so I think I now covered today chapter 7 and chapter 8. Chapter 7, I spoke about the puberty, the different stages of puberty, and the adolescence. Yeah, the different stages in adolescence, and what are the characteristics of adolescence, what are the kind of development that happens, what is the kind of risk the adolescents take, and how they become more vulnerable, and how this stage, gives rise to a lot of issues, and what are the hazards that is very, very common among the adolescent. So with this, I now end this session till we meet again in the next class, where we will be talking about the issues of adolescence. Okay, and then we'll continue in the coming month. So I presume there is no classes in the coming week, but I'm sure the university will give you the dates and the time. So please join in, and thank you very much for the patient listening. And Merry Christmas to all of you. Happy New Year, and may God bless you. Thank you.